Welcome, and thank you all tonight for joining us for our Research Tuesdays event, Revolutionising Radiation Protection. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Kaurna people, the original custodians of the Adelaide Plains and the land on which the University of Adelaide's campuses at North Terrace, Waite and Roseworthy are built. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to the country, and we respect and value their past, present and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs. My name is Olivia Bellis and I'm a PhD candidate in the School of Biomedicine here at the University of Adelaide. In fact, I work in the Supportive Oncology Research Group alongside one of tonight's speakers. I will be your MC tonight and we'll learn about the DAISY project, a project where the University of Adelaide researchers are harnessing the power of a daisy-like herb called feverfew to develop the world's first pill aimed at safeguarding multiple organs against the impacts of radiation. This pill aims to shield patients during treatment, civilians during accidents, astronauts in space, and military personnel in combat zones. Our speakers include Professor Christopher Sweeney, who is the inaugural director of the South Australian Immunogenomics Cancer Institute, or SAGENCI, a professor of medicine at the University of Adelaide, and a consulting medical oncologist at the Royal Adelaide Hospital, as well as SAGENCI research fellows Dr. Catherine Morell and Dr. Agnieszka Komekovic-Yamro, as well as SAMRI postdoctoral researcher and my colleague, Dr. Connor Williams. Please join me in welcoming our speakers to the stage.
Olivia, for that warm introduction, and thank you very much everyone for braving the cold and coming up. This is way more than I thought would arrive, so if people are saying to speak up, go old school and use it like a microphone. Fantastic. So there's many aspects to this story that we'd like to talk about our project. But it's a part of a university, your university, the University of Adelaide, soon to be Adelaide University as we merge with UniSA. But it's science, it's learning, and it's developing the next generation. And you'll see a number of different types of science that we're presenting, drug development, clinical trials and the like. And we have great next generation scientists who'll be doing most of the presentation and sharing most of the data that they've generated. This is what a university does. It creates new knowledge and it develops the next generation. But I'm going to kick off and start the presentation with giving some background. But a first question is radiation a bad thing? I've got to work out which one to press now. So we have a Slido. So who has an iPhone or some sort of a phone? I didn't make an advertisement for Apple, did I? Android or iPhone? Take a moment. Is radiation a bad thing? Yes or no? Or can be good and bad? And what do I need? Okay, so thank you. I've got the young generation teaching me how to do this. I've got my cane out the back there. So we have a number of votes, 23 brave people got up there, 32. So a lot of people think it is good and bad, and we will say, our job tonight is convince that you smart people are correct. It is good and bad. So we use it. Some patients are cured of their cancer because of radiation therapy. We can diagnose conditions, heart blockages with radiation waves that can tell us with coronary angiograms. Can we see tumour spots at an early diagnosis and cut them out? We can also use it to generate power. Some countries are more in favour of that than others. And byproducts from fossil fuels for radiation and CT scans and nuclear medicine come from the mines. So there are positive attributes. And also it's also used in industry for radiographic inspection, thickness and density gauging, leak detection, material modification, radiation processing to increase strength and durability. So there are many ways radiation is a part of our daily life. It's a powerful tool with diverse everyday applications as is written here. But it can cause harms if we're exposed to too much of it. The doses are too high. So great schematics. Thank you, Dr. Morell. Here we have a cell. Radiation comes in and damages the cell, most notably the DNA, and causes the DNA damage with the first exposure. And the radiation also turns on reactive processes in the cell itself, independent of the DNA itself. But if the repair can be damaged, the normal cell goes on living. And just think about when you have radiation burn, if you would, from UV radiation, sunburn, and you recover from that after 3 days, and your nieces and nephews have told you you shouldn't have got sunburn. Yes, I know I shouldn't have. And as they've all gone through the slip, slop, slap learning, as opposed to us who were born in the 60s, we learned about that a lot later. So incomplete repair can lead to cell mutations, and that's why radiation can cause cancers by causing bad DNA. And failed repair can cause cell death or degeneration, and so it can cause organ damage, and that's why we will talk about what acute radiation syndrome and long-term scarring that can come from radiation. I have to admit, as I look at this, I remember back to year 12 high school physics when I asked the physics teacher, how does radiation treat cancer? And he said, I don't know, go to med school. I hadn't even declared I was going to med school, but that was possibly a transformative moment. 1986. Now I see the slide and go, well, actually, now I know. So we're going to talk about how can we prevent the development of radiation sickness. So on the left-hand side here, so your right-hand side, my left, acute radiation syndrome, it's a rapid problem. Too much radiation to the brain can cause seizures, skin burning, general fatigue and disorientation, gastrointestinal nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. Who's seen the television series Chernobyl? Distressing, but honestly real. It really is a good portrayal of it. And most of what you saw was actually the acute radiation syndrome, as well as we've seen the aftermaths of the pictures from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's acute radiation syndrome. If a person recovers from that radiation, injury and inflammation, scarring occurs, and you can get damage to the thyroid with risk of thyroid failure and cancer risk, lung causing inflammation and scarring, and also heart failure, generalized weight loss because you don't absorb your foods well, infertility, and bone marrow. Again, this is from excess radiation, acute blasts, which we need to be developing ways to prevent these side effects if it happens. So how many countries have had a sudden events leading to a large population ARS? Ready? It's not a pub quiz night, but could be. We did really well on the first one. And I promise I won't be asking for names. Actually forgetting the answer. I'm looking for the next slide myself. Right, so we're in the ballpark. More than we should have had. So Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. And we all remember that event. One thing I just watched on an SBS documentary, because the bomb was dropped in the air and exploded in the air, and it had short-wave radiation, so short-acting radioactive isotopes, it wasn't actually a prolonged radiation event, so they didn't have to do much cleaning up, and that's why those towns were actually able to be rehabilitated, as opposed to the other one, which we're talking about, you're probably guessing, Chernobyl. But so that most of the events from that were actually from the acute radiation syndrome, but recognising we've actually worked out the risk of cancer from documenting how far people were from that acute radiation exposure and the amount of radiation they got to actually saying this is your risk of cancer if you have CAT scans and the like. So Ukraine, Chernobyl in 1986. Who was in year 12 high school? I can see a few of you here because I was in high school with you. But so it wasn't a major event. And you could actually possibly even remember that radiation plume and how big an issue it was that we couldn't have milk chocolate from Switzerland for a period of time because of the contamination, because the strontium from the radiation became calcium, which got into the milk supply. This is a big problem if things go wrong. And another one not much talked about, probably because it was before the telly and the internet and social media, was the United Kingdom and wind scale in 1957. You may have been thinking about 2 Mile Island. That was actually contained, so it didn't lead to an event, but by gosh, they were worried about one of these events. So the answer was 4. The question is, how can we protect ourselves from the radiation? Well, limiting the amount of exposure, so limiting the time, distance from the radiation source, and using shields. So that's when you go to your dentist, they run out of the room when you're getting your x-ray of your neck, your teeth. And if you see interventional radiologists or cardiologists, they actually have lead aprons, but they are also, don't use your hands when you're speaking, Dr. Sweeney. So they also have their monitors checking their lifetime dosing. They used to do that for long-haul pilots as well, but speaking with a high school friend of mine, actually, I was on a plane with him, and I said, how do you do for your long-haul flight radiation exposure? He said they used to measure it, but they didn't want to know the data, so they stopped collecting it. So accidental, but the only drugs that are out there for the super bad exposures are these drugs that can stimulate the bone marrow, Neupogen, Neulasta, leukin, and Nplate, and we give these drugs to patients who've had chemotherapy to help the bone marrow recover from the chemotherapy, and iodine thyroid, but they are the only reactive strategies that exist. They only limit acute damage to the bone marrow and the thyroid. So there is an urgent unmet need for the development of a broader acting agent to limit damage to the bone marrow and other organs. Prevention is giving it prior to the radiation, so if you know if a radiation event is happening, dosing it, and the other term is mitigation if given after an event has occurred. So what would an ideal radioprotector look like? Easy to deliver, an oral tablet, no adverse side effects, stable for long-term storage, can protect multiple organs, able to be mass-produced, and sovereign manufacture in Australia, a future made in Australia. We will show how we are attempting to check all those boxes as an Australian university supporting the Australian federal government in its missions, as well as the general population, as a university should. Can we deliver a radioprotector like that? Well, let's talk about it. That's what we're here for. The DAISY project, as we glibly refer to it, but it is a very serious matter, and Flower Power. And yes, I was born in 1969, so I can generally say I was just a child of the 60s, but that wasn't how we got into Flower Power. So here is the overview of what the drug looks like. Well, the active ingredient is something called parthenolide. So it's a parthenolide-based agent, and we can show how it can protect multiple organs. Kat will be showing her work that she started with when she was doing her PhD with a lady called Dr. Pam Sykes at Flinders University a few years ago. But we've just carried this forward at one observation after another. So multiple organs before and after radiation exposure, non-toxic, we've given it to some patients in some settings, long-term dosing, suitable for children and Australian-made, whereas none of the other products really check those boxes. So we think we're onto something. We've still got a bit of work to do. And this is what the DAISY, so Olivia referred to as a DAISY-like project. It's called Feverfew, Tenacin Parthenium. It grows in some people's backyards, including Kat Murrell's, it turns out, and the Executive Support Officer for Segency, Deb Wellington's backyard. But it takes a lot of effort to extract and purify it, called parthenolide, and we turned it into a drug that you can take by mouth and get absorbed. Parthenolide is not absorbable, but this dimethylamino parthenolide, yes, I've practiced that many years, DMAP for short, and we've created a novel formulation because that even had problems with university science. And parthenolide, that's its molecule, won't be asking questions later. For the chemists, you'll notice that's a sesquiterpene lactone, practicing that one as well. And you can see the key thing is that we know that it has anti-tumour activity, turns off excess blood vessel growth, turns off inflammation and is a radiation protectant. And with that, I would love to have Kat Morrell describe what she's been doing.
Lovely. Thanks, Chris. Am I able to leave this here? Is this loud enough, or are we? Yes? Excellent. So we've been working to do a lot of work preclinically in our labs to try and figure out what parthenolide and DMAP does and how it can protect from sort of the adverse side effects of radiation. So some of the work we've done is sort of looking at how we can protect from the symptoms of this acute radiation syndrome. And so some of the work I'll be presenting is looking at just a few of those symptoms of ARS and how we've been showing that DMAP can protect. So firstly, looking at sort of radiation fibrosis. So this is one of the really common side effects from ARS. So fibrosis occurs when you have this sort of persistent inflammation state that radiation causes, and this constant inflammation causes sort of a dysregulation in how organs and tissues are able to repair themselves, and what you end up getting is lots and lots of collagen building up within tissues, which causes like a hardening of the organs. So you can think of like scarring if you're talking about sort of on the skin, but if that fibrosis is occurring in organs like the lung, that causes real issues with breathing. You can get sort of issues with swallowing if you're talking about fibrosis in the sort of the neck or the throat, or real issues with sort of heart failure if you're talking about sort of a cardiovascular problem. So in the animal work that we've done, we've taken sort of mice, given them a course of DMAP following a very high lethal dose of radiation, and looked about 10 weeks post-radiation to see how the fibrosis is affected if we treat or don't treat with DMAP. And what we see is that in looking at just a couple of the tissues, we've sort of looked at a broad spectrum of tissues, but these are just a few. What we see is that when we treat with DMAP, we get a real reduction in the amount of fibrosis that we're seeing in these tissues. So really able to see a functional protection when we pre-treat these mice, or when we treat these mice with DMAP following that high lethal exposure. Similarly, reduced wound healing is a real problem with radiation exposure and sort of the ARS symptoms. So radiation causes this sort of inability for tissues to repair themselves by increasing senescence in cells. So senescence is when cells start to sort of slow down and go into sort of like a dormant state, so they're unable to participate in the process of repair. So you get this sort of chronic wound situation, and that sort of leads to increased scar tissue, increased risk of infection, and sort of higher risk of fibrosis, which sort of goes back to the previous slide. So in these same mice that we looked at previously, we looked at senescence to see as sort of as a measure of sort of wound healing. And again, we see a real reduction in the number of these senescent cells that are around, and sort of in some cases even reducing them down right down to sort of unirradiated levels. So a really good indicator that DMAP is able to have this really strong radioprotective effect. One of the other measures that we've looked at is sort of infertility. So radiation can be extremely damaging to sort of the gonads that are really radiosensitive organs. So in women, sort of radiation, high doses of radiation can entirely kill or really damage eggs, which reduces ovarian reserve. And in men, it can really impair that process of spermatogenesis, which is how sperm is sort of produced. And so what we see following radiation is that these tiny sperm, so the elongated mature sperm that you might see in that spermatogenesis process, where spermatogonia sort of mature down into healthy sperm, they're entirely wiped out, and the ability to create more sperm is entirely stopped. So you end up with this hyperspermia situation. And so in these same mice, we looked at sort of gross testis damage, so the amount of damage that was done in the testis. And while we didn't see any significant difference in the total amount of damage that was done following radiation, which is potentially not surprising because they're such a radiosensitive organ. What we did see was that we saw a real reduction in the amount of hyperspermia that we were seeing in these tissues. So even though they were getting some level of damage, the mice were retaining the ability to reproduce, which was a really important measure of radioprotection. So talking about sort of lethal doses of radiation is probably, hopefully, a very extreme case and hopefully not anything that anyone would really come across. So probably the most common way people would experience some form of ARS would be people who are going through radiotherapy. So this is where we're using radiation to kill tumours. And this is commonly done sort of either with an external beam radiotherapy where radiation from outside of the body is directed at a tumour to sort of kill it. You can also have brachytherapy where you sort of implant a radioactive seed into the tumour and it's sort of the idea is to kill the tumour, irradiate the tumour from the inside out. And so radiation is a really great tool to kill cancer cells, but unfortunately it doesn't really, it's not going to stop it killing the tumour. And so what happens is you often get sort of the normal healthy tissues that are around the tumour damaged, and this leads to all sorts of really horrible side effects. And for some people these can be sort of mildly annoying, a bit uncomfortable, but for many people these side effects can be really debilitating. So anything that we can do to try and really protect those patients from this sort of side effect is something that we're really keen to do. So we've done some preclinical studies sort of trying to mimic a radiotherapy type dose. So we've taken mice and we pre-treat them with DMAP. So we give them DMAP before, during and after a fractionated course of radiotherapy. And so for this particular study, we were doing radiotherapy to sort of the lower half of our mice. So this is sort of looking at sort of mimicking a prostate cancer type of radiotherapy. So the prostate is getting irradiated, bladder, testis, and probably some of the gut and sort of the colon. And so the first thing that we saw with this study was that when you irradiate mice in general, what we tend to see in our sort of our radiotherapy cohort is that they aren't able to gain healthy weight in the same way that unirradiated mice are. And this is usually because the effects of that radiation causes sort of real damage to the gut, so they're unable to sort of effectively absorb nutrients from the food. They have sort of reduced appetite and nausea. They also get pretty horrible diarrhoea. And so what we saw was that when we treated with DMAP, we were able to really recover that normal healthy weight gain, which is an indicator of being able to protect some level of that gut health following radiotherapy. So in addition, we looked at fibrosis in these tissues, and similar to what we saw with those high lethal doses of radiation, we see a real protection from radiation damage in many of these organs. And also looking at testis damage. You can sort of see a quite strong, striking effect from radiation when you see the radiation damage that gets done to the testis, where you get this real shrinkage from that tissue damage. But being able to treat with DMAP significantly protects from a large portion of that damage. And so this is sort of just a little bit of a taster for a lot of the preclinical work that we've done. And now we're at this stage where we can sort of take some of this and put it into an actual clinical context. So we've got some really great projects sort of ongoing and hopefully happening in the future. So Connor, I think, is going to talk a little bit about the current project that we have looking at clinical work.
Thank you, Kat. I'll also do a mic check at the back to make sure everyone can hear. A few thumbs up, great. All right, so just to sort of re-emphasise some of the things that Kat stated on before, I'm sure a lot of people here are aware that as great as they are, cancer therapies do go hand in hand with a lot of unwanted toxicities and side effects. And unfortunately, radiotherapy is no exception to that. And one particularly common side effect which these patients experience is radiation-induced dermatitis, which manifests in a similar way to put it simply, a sunburn would. However, it's a lot more persistent than that and can be a lot more debilitating. And so although we have a lot of new and exciting treatment options for patients with cancer, it still does largely remain a mainstay for a lot of patients experiencing cancer. In particular, highlighting a few head and neck cancer, breast cancer, skin cancer, lung cancer and sarcoma. And so although radiation has been around as a treatment modality in cancer has been around for a really long time, and we're very familiar with the side effects it causes, there still lacks this sort of target interventions to manage these side effects. And so really all that's prescribed clinically for these patients is simple moisturisers such as Sorbolene or QV or anything you'd buy simply at the supermarket. And so whilst a sunburn doesn't sound so bad, it is a lot worse for these patients and can actually lead to not only significant discomfort, but also breaks and disruptions in their treatment. And so really restricting these patients from receiving their potentially life-saving treatment. And even though this is the case, there's still currently no treatments which really target the mechanisms behind this manifestation at its core. And thus was born the Repair 1 study. So this study has formed in true South Australian connections fashion. The Sagency scientists largely required the expertise for large-scale extraction of parthenolide. And PlantWorks, a company in SA, which was founded by the late Peter Francis, had the expertise in plant-based organic skin and hair care product manufacture. And so Professor Sweeney was introduced by a mutual friend in Dr. Catherine Vidian, and as a result, the Repair 1 parthenolide lotion was born. And so this translational study is a widespread collaboration between not only Sagency and PlantWorks, but also the Central Adelaide Local Health Network in Carlin, which is the Royal Adelaide Hospital, as well as the Supportive Oncology Research Group here at the University of Adelaide. And so to give you a little bit of an insight into what this study looks like, I will emphasise that this study is very much in progress as we speak. But what this looks like is a phase 0, so pilot, double-blinded study where we're looking to recruit 10 participants into this study. And specifically, we're looking at individuals who are diagnosed with locally advanced head and neck cancer. So that's largely also, as it would say, cancer of the head and neck region. And this is a cohort which is really, really underrepresented in the space of supportive care and is in dire need of innovations such as these to allow them to go through their treatment well. And so what treatment often looks like for these individuals, to give you a bit of context into sort of what a radiation regimen looks like if you're not familiar with it, is these individuals receive 6 to 7 weeks of daily radiotherapy, so Monday through Friday often, with a break on the weekends. So totaling around 30 to 35 individual radiotherapy sessions. And so why this study is rather unique and a really exciting opportunity to test this sort of this intervention is we're specifically targeting individuals receiving radiation of a bilateral nature. So that means they receive equal amounts of radiation to both the left and right sides of their neck. And so it really gives us a good opportunity to test both the parthenolide lotion, so the lotion containing that parthenolide compound, but also on the opposite side, the exact same lotion, which simply just doesn't contain the parthenolide lotion. And so, as I said, this is currently in progress. So this is just a bit of an insight into how this sort of thing is being applied in a clinical setting, but we do very much look forward to seeing the outcomes of these studies. And an important question which may have flagged in your head is when we do translate this to patients, how do we know that it's not protecting the cancer itself? And so to speak a little bit more back to that, I'll bring Kat back up.
Yes, so obviously the most important thing when we're talking about using this in a clinical context is we do not want to be protecting the tumour. So we've done a lot of preclinical work to check exactly that. So one of the studies that we did, we took a prostate cancer mouse model. So this is a mouse that has prostate cancer, but all the other tissues remain healthy, and did a short course of DMAP with a dose of radiation to see how the normal versus cancer tissues responded following DMAP treatment. And similar to what I showed before, a lot of the healthy tissues, we saw really nice radiation protection, so a reduction in the amount of cell death that we were seeing in these tissues. But really interestingly, when we looked at the tumour tissue, we didn't just see no protection. What we saw was an increased sensitisation. So not just a lack of protecting the tumour, but the DMAP was able to make the tumour more sensitive to radiation. And one of the really cool things when we looked at these tissues in a little bit more detail, we could take each of our mice in our study and sort of grade the tumours to see sort of which tumours were more advanced or more aggressive and sort of give them a score. And when we looked at how that score in terms of how aggressive the tumour was and how that related to the amount of cell death we were seeing following radiation, the really great thing was that the most amount of cell death we were seeing was in those more aggressive tumours. So when we treated the mice with DMAP, it was able to make the most aggressive tumours the most sensitised to cancer while having a radioprotective effect in the healthy tissues, which makes it a really incredible tool to potentially be able to use in a clinical context. And now I'm going to see who's still listening, and we're going to do one more little quiz. So we see, okay, we've shown that we see this difference between cancer versus non-cancer. Do we need to figure out why we're seeing this effect, or can we just say, excellent, let's use it. Let's use it in the patients. Okay. Right. You people still awake? I love it. 6, 8, excellent. Nice, I like it. The honest people saying who cares. It's you know, to be fair, it is an approach. But I will say probably as scientists, we generally tend to agree that yes, we probably want to figure out why we're seeing this differential effect because, you know, we like to know what's happening, but also if we're wanting to use this in a clinical context, we want to make sure that the drug is not having some sort of adverse sort of interaction with other drugs and we're not having some sort of off-target effect. And so we've been doing a lot of work in the lab to sort of figure out why we're having this effect. And a lot of the work that we've done, there's sort of lots and lots of sort of studies and experiments, but a lot of what we figured out comes down to the way that DMAP is able to activate a cell's stress response pathway. So the way that it's able to sort of make cells sort of more or less responsive to stress. So for example, you can see here, this is just a little bit of an example with sort of a few antioxidant proteins that we've shown of interest. And what we see when we treat cells, so this is sort of in the purple, there's the non-cancer cell versus the cancer cell in green, and a time course following treating with DMAP. What we see is that in the non-cancer cells, when we treat with DMAP, we see this sort of general upregulation and increase in the amount of antioxidant proteins that these cells are producing. Whereas in the cancer cells, they're either having no response or we're actually inhibiting the amount of this antioxidant sort of protein and signalling that's going on. So what we think, a very sort of broad sort of schematic of what's going on is that in our healthy cells, when we treat with DMAP, it's able to activate these normal stress response pathways that upregulates antioxidant responses. So it, in effect, primes the cells to already be in this sort of protective mechanism before they get introduced to radiation. So it sort of pre-prepares them to be in a protection mode. Whereas in cancer cells, the cancer cells actually have sort of a reasonably dysregulated stress response pathway. So they respond differently to normal cells. And when we treat with DMAP, we actually see a shutting down of these stress response pathways and a prevention of these antioxidant proteins and pathways to be activated. So it prevents the cancer cells from being able to protect themselves against that radiation exposure. And in addition, because DMAP is an anti-inflammatory agent, it reduces inflammation in cancer cells, which already have high levels of inflammation, and that in and of itself reduces the radio resistance that we see in cancer cells. So two very different responses. So I guess we've done a huge amount of sort of preclinical work in the lab and trying to figure out mechanistically how parthenolide and DMAP are able to have these effects. And we want to now take what we've shown of the drug in the lab, how do we take that and give it to patients? So how do we take a drug that we would use on cells in a dish in a lab and then give it to patients? So one of the things that we've been doing is taking the DMAP compound and making it into something that is able to be have increased stability, both to be able to give as an oral tablet, so it's easy to give to patients, but also to have increased stability so you can store it on the shelf, or if we were wanting to send it for military use, so send it off for deployment or for stockpiling, so it can have increased shelf-stable abilities. So that's what we've been doing here, and we've named it our SAI-001 compound, our Sagency radioprotector, and really this is a really excellent Adelaide and Australia-owned story. And so Agnieszka's going to jump up and sort of tell you a little bit of the story of how we've come to SAI-001.
Thank you, Kat. Due to the impressive biological properties of parthenolide, our team at Sagency and the University of Adelaide is developing a parthenolide-based pharmaceutical. And I'm happy to introduce you to our project, but more from chemistry point of view. To date, parthenolide has not been chemically synthesized on an industrial scale. It is currently sourced exclusively from feverfew plants. And for our ongoing project, feverfew plants are cultivated both in a greenhouse and in a 5,000 meter square protected field at the University of Adelaide Roseworthy campus. Our plants undergo 2 harvest cycles in the vegetative phase, but also after flowering during senescence stage. And the parthenolide content within feverfew plants varies depending on environmental conditions, ranging typically from 0.2 to 2%. Therefore, it's essential for us to explore other options of parthenolide production. So to maximize parthenolide production within feverfew plants, we are collaborating with the ARC Center of Excellence in Plants for Space, led by Professor Matthew Gilliam and Professor Jenny Mortimer, to identify the optimal conditions for indoor growth utilizing vertical farms. The aim of our work is also to develop a synthetic biology approach for rapid, on-demand, and local production of parthenolide within feverfew plants, but with increased content. And this is the part of our ongoing SA Multi-omics grant, supported by SAGC and Bioplatform Australia. So far, our preliminary results are very promising. Of and the team were able to grow feverfew plants in vertical farms with success, and also with a high content of parthenolide. So hopefully in the near future we can show more exciting data. And vertical farms has several advantages over traditional growth because they can provide us with a constant year-round production of parthenolide with maximized yield. This is also not susceptible towards climate and weather changes, and it also offers huge space savings compared to growing plants in a field. And that's why that would be an amazing opportunity to add value for our field growth of feverfew. Once our plants are ready for harvest, they are subjected to several processing steps. They can be processed either as a fresh chaffed biomass, or they can be subjected for drying and grinding, which is also important for storage purposes. And in the next step, our biomass is transported to our industry partner Black Squid Distillery, not for feverfew beverages production, but for a large-scale ethanol extraction and concentration of the extract. Thanks to great stability of parthenolide and also its heat resistance, we can extract parthenolide using ethanolic solution and then concentrate our crude extract through distillation, because parthenolide will survive and won't degrade. And the other advantages of this process is that we can reuse ethanol for upcoming extractions with another batch of the plant, which is a good aspect of green chemistry. In the next step, our concentrated crude extracts are transported to the School of Chemical Engineering, and they are subjected to multi-step filtration in order to remove solid impurities. These include centrifugation, vacuum-assisted filtration, and tangential flow filtration. And after these processes, our extracts are transported, not far away this time, but they are transported to the chemistry department, to the ADI lab, where they are subjected to initial purification using liquid-liquid extraction technique. This technique relies on differing affinities of compounds to immiscible liquids. In case of our extract, after vigorous shaking of concentrated aqueous feverfew extract with organic solvents such as ethyl acetate, partenolite is prone to come from aqueous lower phase into the upper organic phase, leaving these brown, more polar impurities behind. This is the first purification step. Then we separate these immiscible liquids and concentrate our partenolite fraction, and in the next step we load it onto the chromatographic column for further purification. We monitor our process using thin layer chromatography. We monitor each fraction that we collected to know which fractions contain partenolite, that they can be combined, evaporate, and subjected to the final processing stage, which is recrystallization. And by dissolving partenolite fraction in a hot solvent, such as ethanol, and then cooling it down, we are able to crystal out partenolite from the solution, leaving these colorful impurities behind in a solution. This process is performed twice, because in the first step, partenolite co-crystallized with some impurities, but then we can successfully remove them in another step, producing white crystals. There's also alternative method of purifying partenolite, which is the use of preparative high-performance liquid chromatography. This is very powerful tool. However, it's mostly utilized for research purposes, for instance, to produce partenolite for in vivo studies, pharmacokinetics, or to produce partenolite for lotion formulations in a gram scale rather than for industrial kilogram scale production, because it uses quite a lot of solvents. However, we also utilize it for our research purposes. We purified partenolite from impurities, also producing these white shiny crystals. And we were able to purchase this equipment last year thanks to the support from Defense Innovation Partnership. And at every stage of our research, we monitor the content of each crude extract, liquid-liquid extract, every chromatographic fraction, and the final product utilizing HPLC and LCMS technique. As you can see in these photos, the final product is like individual single compound with all the impurities removed during each step, starting from crude extract, finishing after crystallization. Once we're happy with the purity and the quality of our product, partenolite is sent from Adelaide to Sydney to our industry partner Ab Initio Pharma. And as a part of our ongoing Australia's Economic Accelerator grant, Ab Initio Pharma further modifies partenolite into the final SA1 formulation.
Thanks, Agnieszka. So clearly this is a long story, but it's got to go somewhere, doesn't it? So to be able to take something from a university setting to the real world setting, we actually have to have a commercialization arm. So within the university, there is a proactive goal of taking university-supported and government-funded research to the real world, and that requires forming a commercial entity, and we've formed one called Parthera. Guess where the name Parth comes from and where Thera comes from. So I've had great support from the commercialisation office, most specifically a Daisy fan and Donaldson, who came up with the name. And so this will help us actually raise funding from various private investors, relationships with pharmaceutical companies who can do the large scale, et cetera, and this is a path where we can actually get this to market. And our first market that we're going to be focusing on is the medical countermeasures market, and there's a strategy for doing that. But it takes a commercialisation business lens to do that. So we're starting that. You may have seen that this is a South Australian-based story, and this is a graphic I'm going to show you on how Australian it is. So we have our farmers, and apparently the farmer, Ben Fleet, and his team out there in Roseworthy. So it actually went a bit too far. I overdid it, so overplayed it. So try that again. So first one, starting at Roseworthy, the plant grows and then it goes to Black Squid for the extillation, down here to the Adelaide, to Ab Initio, that's making the new formulation for us in Sydney and back to Adelaide. And then the goal is for it to go around the world. So what you can also see is that there's a lot of, we don't know, let's give it a go. And a lot of this is in a South Australian, we can do this type of an approach. This is an Australian thing. We can do this. We have the know-how, we have the resources and the ambition. We just have to have the confidence to realise we can do this in South Australia. And again, I'm going to go back to that slide because I really like it. We can do it. Oh, wait, it's not letting me do it. Why is it not letting me do it? Oh, I've got to go back. Got to go way back. Kat put a lot of effort into this, and I just wanted to look at that. Farms to Black Squid to Barossa Valley, and now it's doing it on something, and then to Sydney, and then back and around the world. Look at that. We can do this. This is South Australia. Daisies for everyone. This is almost like the Star Wars credits where it just keeps rolling on and on and on. And I'm going to try and go through some people from the beginning. So this work starts from the laboratory, some observations. I've been developing parthenolide and dimethylmino parthenolide for a cancer indication. Got a random email phone call from out of the blue from Pam Sykes one day when I was in Boston because Wayne Tilley knew her and she said, hey, you heard about this parthenolide and this Sweeney fella? Yeah, he was here a while ago, but he's now in Boston. Give him a call. And then Kat got to working on that as a collaboration with me in my Boston premises. Kat started working on it in Flinders. Then Kat came and worked with me in Boston. And then we came back to Adelaide. We're really happy to be back in Australia. And Tony Hawker and Danny Dixon and giving us some advice on this countermeasures story. The preclinical team, Kat again, Mark, Kim, Trong, Kiara, a team in the laboratory lab, wet lab doing the work. The feverfew cultivation, so Gurjit Gill from Waite and Roseworthy, helping us work out how to grow a plant. It's not as easy as you think. Bloody weeds. Ben Fleet, the farmer, who's done so much work with his team out there. And I just cannot thank Ben enough for actually just really sticking into it. The cute thing is he takes his kids along to help along with the process, and they describe the early plants in the greenhouse as the cancer plants. So there's so many lovely parts to this story. Maybe they'll be future phytochemists. So that's what Agnieszka is. A plant chemist is a phytochemist, and so maybe they've got inspired by Agnieszka's work. So chemical engineering, Agnieszka, Luis, Chunxia Zhao, and Amy Liu on helping us make this new product in Adelaide. The repair team, Hannah, Professor Hien Lee, the radiation oncologist, Connor Williams, who you've heard from today, the trial participants and the families. The plant works team, Shara, Fiona, Francis, and Catherine Vivian for the connection. A medical school connection, you're having a conversation at dinner and you're boring everyone else about your plant-based medicine love. That gets a connection for you. So yes, the rest of the table was bored, but Catherine and I had a great chat. John, a high school friend, and Darren Kinsey, who I found online trying to find out, I can't do this at scale at this other place, but let's try this one. And John says, well, yeah, actually, that's my brother-in-law. Okay, John. Can you connect me? Ab Initio, who's helping us make the drug, South Australian, the team at Sagenci, Anne, Hadassah, Gia, and helping getting the grants written, our relationship with the military, Sabre Alliance, DIP, DMTC, Parthera, the company we're forming, and you can see the funding from multiple different sources. If you're thinking we're cobbling this together as we go along, yes, we are. And that's what it takes. But specifically noting the Defence Innovation Partnership, who gave it a go. There was a bit of a conversation, what the hell's going on with this drug? We'll let them have a go and see what they can do. So thank you for the early investment and faith. The Australian Economic Accelerator, the Future Made in Australia effort from the Australian Government, James and Diana Ramsay Foundation, and the University of Adelaide, and Peter Francis Memorial Donations should be noted, NHMRC funding, Department of Health and Aged Care, that's paying for the Sagenci's establishment, private philanthropic donations, James and Diana, University of Adelaide resources, and the Defence Innovation Partnership. So thank you very much, and we'd love to take questions.
So we'll now open up for some questions from the audience. Does anybody have a question? Otherwise, I'll start with a pre-submitted one.
Is there a microphone? Put your hand up.
Oh, yeah, we've got a question over there, so a microphone's coming now.
Good, thank you. Thank you. I've yet to hear a Sagenci talk that I didn't find exciting from the very first one. Tonight, there's parthenolide and there's DMAP and there's SAI001. They all different things.
So the variations... sorry.
Oh, sorry, the DMAP is a parthenolide with some stuff on it, so it's absorbed. Yes. Is SAI001 DMAP? And the fact that you've called it 001 suggests to me there's going to be 002 and 003.
You're really excited what 007's going to be?
Yeah, with chemical modification. Is that the plan, and what would you be looking at?
So the nomenclature is SAI, derived from Sagenci, 001 being the first cab off the rank. But we do plan to make different modifications of this for a cancer indication, solid tumours, haematology, and that would be 02 and 03. The modification is actually proprietary information that we haven't patented yet. So we have a patent around the DMAP radiation protection, but the new formulation has proprietary information right now until we get a patent. And the active ingredient, the API, active pharmaceutical ingredient, is DMAPed. But how do you make it more soluble and more deliverable? And Dr. Janis, you talked about how do we make drugs more... develop better drugs, but develop better ways to inhibit drugs, but there's also new science on how to make drugs more able to be delivered to patients, and that's on that side of the equation.
Yep, Charlotte.
Oh.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Okay.
I have a question from online. This is Nigel. He says, fascinating talk, thank you. Are there any known side effects? And have I correctly understood that this enhances any cancer radiotherapy by both reducing the effect on healthy cells and also increasing the effect on the dose of cancer cells? Sounds like a wonder drug. That's what Nigel says.
It makes your whites whiter and your brights brighter. So I'll take the first one. So we have advanced it into clinical trials where we've dosed it in dogs and rats and patients, humans. We saw activity with a previous fumarate salt in killing some cancer cells without any toxicity, except that some trouble with digesting it, which speaks to the pharmaceutical problem that we've overcome with the new formulation. So we actually can get good doses into patients, but not reliably. So we've got a new formulation. So we're encouraged that it has a relatively good side effect profile after 28 days of dosing in some patients, but we've got to do a lot more. But we didn't see any substantial side effects in the rats and the dogs at really high doses for long dosing, but that's a work in progress. But turning to Kat for the second part of that question of Nigel's.
Yes, so what we figured out about the way the compound works is it does seem to be reasonably transferable across tumour types. So in theory, we're hoping that it is something that can be transferable to many different cancers that would be receiving radiotherapy. What we have seen is that there is sort of the extent to what we're seeing in terms of the ability to radiosensitise a tumour or the ability to sort of radioprotect some tissues than others. We see sort of slight differences in the amount, but we're really hopeful that we can be able to translate it into multiple cancer types.
Thank you for that, Chris and Kat. Just jumping on, Kat, one more question from online. Alana asks, is there a reason why only male, not female mice were used in the radiation testing? I'm interested in the protection provided from damage to ovaries as well.
Absolutely, and that is a great question. So the study that we did, that particular study, we only looked at testis. We did that particular study, we looked at male and female mice for all the other organs. For that particular one, we only looked at the male testis from those mice. But we have plans to do big, much larger scale studies where we are looking at a whole lot more organs from male and female mice, including sort of looking at protecting female fertility as well as the male fertility.
And longer dosing as well.
I believe, unfortunately, that's all we have time for with questions tonight. I'm sorry. So I'll just have to wrap up that now. So thank you, everyone, for the questions that you've asked tonight. And once again, thanking tonight's speakers, Chris, Catherine, Agnieszka and Connor. And thanks to our audience. And be sure to sign up to the Research Tuesdays email for the latest information. And have a great night.